Welcome to the annotation of War Photographer by Caroline Duffy for GCSE Poetry. Okay, so our initial annotations, green annotations are contextual, purple annotations are structural, and any pink annotations are language. So this poem was published in 1985. It was arguably inspired by the Pulitzer Prize-winning photograph Napalm Girl, which you can view online. And Napalm Girl is an example of a photo that firstly was really important because it demonstrated the true horrors of war, but secondly it questioned the ethics of war photographers in that they take photos of hideous things and seem to not do anything about it. So this poem is all about the questioning of the ethics of war photography. Is it exploitative or is it necessary for education? So there are 4 stanzas of equal length and they have a regular rhyme scheme. This echoes the narrator's need to assert control over a chaotic situation. So in the first stanza, in his dark room he is finally alone. There's a double meaning for dark room. Obviously it reflects on the room where developing occurred, so actually where the photographer was and where he was working, but it also hints at the subject matter of the photographs or his mindset, that they are quite dark and he has to live with these images that are scarred upon his brain. He is finally alone with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. So the sibilance there was spools of suffering set. Slows the pace to emphasise the sense of suffering, so it really makes the reader imagine what these spools of suffering might look like, how awful they must be that you have to slow down to take them in. The military language here, with the ordered rows, could be the application of this need to order things for the photographer. And then there's that kind of paradox of control, trying to assert order over the disordered. And the rows could also suggest graves, so it could be reflective of all the people that he has seen murdered and all of the death he's experienced. The only light is red, so this is similar to dark room in that it could have a double meaning. So it literally refers to the red light in the dark room where you develop the photos, but it could also refer to blood, or it could refer to a warning, so maybe reminiscent of the feelings of war and the experience of war. As though this were a church and he a priest. So this simile here suggests the importance of the photographer's occupation, which might be an indication from Duffy about how she feels about war photography and the necessity of war photography. It could also suggest the power of the narrative, that he is able to tell the story, so he controls perhaps which photos are taken, from which angle they're taken, of who they're taken, and so he has a certain amount of control over the narrative of war. This list here of Beirut, Belfast, Phnom Penh, these plosives break the ordered calmness, and that could echo the gunfire, so that kind of shock to the system. And these are sites of war. All flesh is grass at the end is a biblical allusion and refers to the transient nature of life. So perhaps the war photographer, more than anybody else, understands that life is impermanent, and that's what is represented through his photography. In the second stanza, he has a job to do. He utilises monosyllabic, simple words, and it's a simple sentence as well. This turns the focus back to the duty that the photographer thinks that he has. And it's similar to other war poetry as well, about the idea of duty and having to do things for a reason, perhaps bigger than themselves. It talks about the solutions that slop in trays. Again, this is a double meaning, so a literal developing solution, or it could be metaphorical, about the fact that the war photographer has the answers to how to solve the wars, to end the wars. But slopping could suggest carelessness, the idea that people are quite careless with other people's lives or about getting into war to begin with. And then the narrator describes his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. And the verb tremble is suggestive of PTSD, which could be quite similar to remains, and the idea that the photographer is incredibly affected by what he has seen and what he's captured on film. And then returns to rural England. The soft sounds of rural England contrast with the plosive battlegrounds previously of Beirut and Belfast. So it kind of shows that there is a contrast between these two different sites, and England is often associated with being quite calm and safe. And he also emphasises this by referring to the ordinary pain. So this oxymoron trivialises the problems faced by those not affected by war, so perhaps those living in England. And this could also suggest a preference as well, that obviously you'd rather be subjected to ordinary pain than the horrendous incidents that are going on in other war sites. For example, as you go further down, this nightmare heat and the running children that is referred to could allude to the Napalm Girl photo, which I spoke about at the beginning of this video. In the third stanza, the narrator reflects on a memory that he has, quite a visceral memory, and the Volta here, with something is happening, hones in on this particular memory, and it's very similar to Remains in this idea that you cannot escape this image or this experience. So he talks about this stranger who he remembers seeing, who died in front of him, and refers to him as or her as a half-formed ghost. So this could be a referral to the photo as it's developing, because it slowly emerges if you look at photo development. Or it could be a memory that slowly emerges in his brain, or maybe a memory that he's starting to lose slightly, or the details have become a bit vague. Or it could be about this person dying and he sees them as they're dying. And then he talks about the blood stained into foreign dust, the idea that this happens somewhere else. And I think this is very easy for people perhaps in the Western world to think of these things as being somewhere else. So wars happen in other countries, they don't happen here. And then it's so easy to be distanced from that and not feel the personal effect of it. But he talks about this blood stain, which is very similar to Remains with the blood shadow. And this perhaps suggests that the war photographer has this on his mind and he can't ever forget it. It is stained. And the must and dust here, there's a comparison created because of the rhyme between the two words. It's a reminder of the transience of life, or sympathy. So he feels that he has a duty to do, so something that he must, but then it becomes stained into foreign dust. So perhaps actually his job isn't as important as he considers it to be, or the impact of his job is not everlasting, which is what he wanted. And in the final stanza, he talks about 100 agonies in black and white. So talking about the photos, but obviously talking about specifically the horrendous photos of war. And this is a quantifiable figure, so 100 seems like a lot of photos, and this is just one developing session. Putting them in black and white suggests the colours removed, so that could be a reflection of the distance that the Western audience feel about war, about it being foreign dust. But it could also suggest, when you think of things as black and white, that euphemism for kind of the reality, that it's black and white, you can see it right there in front of you, it's evidence. The final message is they do not care, and it's ambiguous who they are. Could it be the readership? Could it be the publishers? Could it be the government? But there's certainly that sense that war is something that should end, and war is something that could be prevented, but people are just not seeing the evidence and not dealing with it effectively. The comparative figure with 5 or 6 near the top of this stanza shows the difference between the 100 and the 5 or 6. So it's the idea that he has 100 pictures, but 5 or 6 of the best ones, to put it bluntly, will be chosen. And this suggests a kind of disregard for people who have this or endure this suffering. And I think the photographer is really angry about this, and this is emphasised through the sibilants and plosive sounds in Sunday Supplement, which follows. And the reader's eyeballs prick with tears. So again, this is a comment on the readership. This suggests a minimal or temporary sadness. They're not actually crying, they're just welling up. So they feel affected by it, but not enough. And that's what the war photographer is really, really angry about.